All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready to dive into another deep dive.
Absolutely. Got my scuba gear ready.
Today, we're wading into the waters of the U.S. debit card market, and let me tell you, things are about to get interesting.
Yeah, this isn't just about swiping plastic at the grocery store. We're talking billions of dollars, alleged monopolies, and a new complaint from the DOJ that has Visa sweating.
So, for those of us who just use our debit cards to, buy coffee and stuff, what's the big deal?
Well, imagine this. You're at the coffee shop, right?
Yeah.
You go to pay, grab your debit card without even thinking about it.
Pretty much my morning routine, yeah.
Right, we all do it. But that seemingly simple tap just plugged you into a massive system, and the DOJ claims Visa's been pulling the strings, stifling competition, and maybe even costing you money. Okay, so when I use my debit card, I'm actually interacting with Visa. I always thought it was just me and my bank.
That's what they want you to think. But behind the scenes, there's this whole network that connects your bank to the store, and Visa is one of the biggest players in that space.
So what exactly is the DOJ accusing them of?
Basically, they're saying Visa's using its dominant position to box out competitors and maintain an iron grip on the debit card market.
Dominant how? Don't we get to choose which card we use?
Sure, you can choose your bank and your card, but what about the businesses? The DOJ says Visa's locked in a huge chunk of the banks, something like 60% according to their figures, so they have enormous leverage.
60%? That sounds like a lot.
It is. And that's just the banks. Think about it. Your bank needs businesses to accept its cards, and businesses need customers who use those cards. It's what they call a two-sided market.
Right, kind of like a chicken and egg situation.
Exactly. And the DOJ argues that Visa, dominance on the banking side, gives them the power to dictate terms to businesses on the other side, even if those businesses might prefer to use a different, maybe cheaper network.
Hold on, wait, so there are other networks out there besides Visa?
Yeah, definitely. There are a bunch of smaller competitors, even some that specialize in those chip and PIN transactions, which can sometimes be less expensive for businesses.
So if these other networks exist, and they might be cheaper, why are we stuck with Visa being so dominant? Didn't Congress pass that Durbin Amendment thing a while back? I thought that was supposed to level the playing field.
You're right. The Durbin Amendment in 2010 was designed to increase competition. The idea was to require every debit card to offer at least two unaffiliated networks.
So businesses would have more choice, right? Sounds like a good thing for everyone except maybe Visa.
That was the hope. But here's the thing. The DOJ claims Visa found a loophole, a way to exploit certain types of transactions that they knew would give them the upper hand.
Loophole. Now you've got me really interested. What kind of loophole are we talking about?
Well, they're called non-contestable transactions.
Non-contestable. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating.
It's actually pretty straightforward. Think of it like this. These are specific transactions where Visa basically has exclusive control. Other networks can't touch them.
So even if a business wanted to use a different network, sometimes they wouldn't even have a choice.
That's what the DOJ is claiming. And they say Visa used this to their advantage by offering businesses what you might call a Hobson's choice.
A Hobson's choice. That sounds more like a lose-lose situation than a choice.
It basically is. The DOJ alleges that Visa said, sure, you can use other networks, but you have to route a huge percentage of your transactions through us, or we'll hit you with much higher fees.
So even with potentially cheaper options out there, businesses were kind of stuck with Visa because of these non-contestable transactions they had no choice but to make.
Exactly. To really understand how this played out in the real world, let's say you run a fast food restaurant. You got your burgers, your fries.
Oh man, I'm already hungry. All right, I'm picturing it.
So as a restaurant owner, you want to give your customers different ways to pay, right?
Yeah.
You want to accept all the major cards, maybe even some of those smaller, cheaper networks.
Right, the more options, the better, right?
Yeah.
Makes my customers happy, and hey, maybe I can even save a little money on fees.
Sounds like a win-win. But then Visa comes along with these things called routing agreements and something they call a cliff pricing structure.
A cliff, like I'm about to walk off the edge. What is cliff pricing?
It's kind of like a loyalty program, but instead of rewards, it's punishments. Imagine this Visa offers you, the restaurant owner, what seems like a good deal, a lower rate on your transaction fees, but only if you process a very high percentage of transactions through them.
Okay, I mean, I guess that makes sense, incentivizing you to use their services.
Right, totally standard practice. But here's the catch. If you don't meet their very specific volume requirements, even by a little bit, they slap you with insanely high fees. We're talking about fees that are sometimes even higher than what you would be paying with a different network altogether.
So it's like they're punishing you for not giving them enough business, even if you're offering other payment options.
That's exactly what the DOJ is alleging. It's this very subtle but powerful way to keep businesses in line, even if there are cheaper alternatives out there.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Visa potentially squeezing traditional businesses, but what about all those fintech companies popping up? Apple Pay, PayPal, all those. Surely Visa's power doesn't extend to them, right?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
So are we talking about fintech being like the rebel alliance fighting against the evil empire of Visa?
Huh? It's kind of like that, yeah. The DOJ's case suggests that Visa saw these fintech companies, especially the big ones like Apple Pay and PayPal, as a direct threat to their power.
But those companies aren't really the same, are they? I mean, I use Apple Pay with my Visa card sometimes.
Right, but that's exactly what Visa wants you to do. Use Apple Pay, but keep it tied to your existing cards and banks. What really worries them is the potential for these fintech companies to cut them out of the equation entirely. Imagine.
Wait, like a world without Visa.
Think about it. You use your phone, or maybe even just your face, to make payments directly from your bank account to the store.
Yeah.
No plastic card, no Visa network in the middle taking a cut.
Okay, yeah, when you put it like that, I can see why they'd be a little concerned.
Concerned is an understatement. The DOJ calls it an existential threat. These fintech companies could completely change how we pay for things. And Visa knows it.
So what did they do? Try to shut them down before they got too big?
Well, it's not so easy to just shut down companies like Apple and PayPal. They're giants in their own right. Instead, the DOJ claims Visa opted for a more strategic approach. A classic one, really. Carrots and sticks.
Okay, now you're talking my language. Break it down for me. What were the carrots and what were the sticks?
Right, so the carrots were basically enormous financial incentives offered to these potential rivals. We're talking hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars in some cases.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty sweet carrot. But I imagine those carrots came with a little catch, right?
You know it. The DOJ alleges that these deals came with some serious strings attached. The main one being that these companies would agree not to develop their own systems that would compete directly with Visa's core business.
So it's basically, here's a truckload of cash, now promise not to build anything that makes us obsolete.
Pretty much. But it wasn't just about dangling carrots. The DOJ also says Visa used the threat of sticks, meaning things like jacking up fees or making it harder for these companies to operate if they didn't play ball.
Classic power move.
Right.
So with all these fintech companies out there, why is the DOJ's complaint so focused on Apple in particular?
Well, Apple, with Apple Pay, really had the potential to change the game. Remember those non-contestable transactions we were talking about? The ones Visa essentially controls.
Right, those transactions where businesses have no choice but to use Visa.
Exactly. The DOJ claims that Visa saw Apple Pay as a way for merchants to start bypassing those transactions. If people were paying with their phones using Apple Pay, it could potentially cut into Visa's profits significantly.
So Apple Pay was like their worst nightmare?
Pretty much. And the DOJ claims that Visa was willing to pay a hefty price to avoid that nightmare. The complaint alleges that Visa is paying Apple huge sums of money, we're talking potentially billions, to keep them from becoming a serious competitor.
Wow, so they're literally throwing money at the problem.
It just goes to show how much of a threat Visa perceived from Apple. They were willing to sacrifice short-term profits to maintain their grip on the market.
It's like a high-stakes poker game with billions of dollars on the line. But how does all of this, the alleged monopolies, the deals with Apple, actually affect the average person like me who just uses their debit card a few times a day?
That's the million, or should I say billion-dollar question. And it all comes down to this. When there's less competition, prices tend to go up, and innovation tends to go down.
So you're saying this whole thing would be costing us money?
That's exactly what the DOJ is arguing.
So you're saying this whole thing could be costing us money?
That's exactly what the DOJ is arguing. When a company like Visa allegedly has this much control, they don't have to try as hard to win your business. Think about it. If there's no real competition, why bother offering the lowest fees or the best services?
It's like that old saying, competition breeds excellence. Or in this case, maybe the lack of it breeds higher prices.
Exactly. Those fees that Visa charges, they don't just disappear. Businesses end up paying more. And you know who ultimately ends up footing the bill for that?
Let me guess, the customers.
Bingo. It's like this hidden cost that gets baked into everything we buy, from that morning coffee to, well, pretty much everything.
And I'm guessing it's not just about us paying a few extra cents here and there.
Yeah.
This whole thing could be holding back innovation, too.
Absolutely. Now, I'm not saying that if Visa had more competition, we'd all be paying for our groceries with, cryptocurrency embedded in our smart toasters or something.
Although, now that you mention it.
But seriously, think about what happens when companies have to compete. They're constantly trying to improve, to come up with new ideas, to offer better products and services, all at lower prices. It's what drives progress.
So you're saying that without that competitive pressure, companies like Visa might just get complacent, keep doing things the same old way, even if it's not the best for the rest of us.
That's the danger. And it's not just hypothetical. We've seen it happen in other industries. Without competition, consumers lose out on potentially better, cheaper, and more innovative options.
It really makes you think about the power dynamics at play here. It's easy to just swipe your card without thinking about it, but there's this whole battle going on behind the scenes that most of us are totally unaware of. But what happens now? What happens if the DOJ wins this case? Could it actually change things?
It could be a real game changer. If the DOJ is successful, it could force Visa to change its practices, open up the market to more competition, and ultimately give more power back to consumers and businesses.
So there's hope for a future where we're not all just at the mercy of these giant payment networks.
Exactly. This case is a good reminder that even in seemingly complex and impenetrable systems like this, change is possible.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been quite the eye-opener. We started with a simple debit card transaction and ended up exploring allegations of monopolies, billion-dollar deals, and the future of how we pay for things.
It just goes to show there's often more going on beneath the surface than we realize.
So the next time you pull out that debit card, take a moment to think about the forces at play, the choices you have, and the potential for a more innovative and fair payment system.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the hidden world of debit card transactions. We hope you learned something new today. As always, thanks for listening, and until next time, keep asking those questions.
And keep those debit cards handy, because who knows what the future holds. All right, so let's dive into something that you probably don't think about too much, but it touches your wallet more than you realize.
Right.
Think about the last time you used your debit card.
Okay.
Did you ever stop and think about all the stuff happening behind the scenes? Like the banks and the networks and regulations, all that, just to make that swipe work?
Yeah.
Probably not, right?
No.
Most people don't. It's like a financial ballet or something.
Right, yeah.
That we never get to see.
It's happening with every purchase.
Yeah, exactly. But lately, the Department of Justice has had a front row seat. They've been watching this whole thing very closely.
Oh, really?
And they are not happy.
Okay.
They just hit Visa with this, massive lawsuit.
Wow.
Antitrust. They're claiming that Visa's basically monopolized the way we use our debit cards.
Interesting.
We're talking billions of dollars here.
Wow.
This could change how we buy, everything. Groceries, gas, you name it.
So this isn't like a theoretical thing.
No, not at all.
This is a big deal.
This is a real big deal. And it goes beyond just, legal jargon and technicalities.
Right.
This case is about innovation.
Okay.
It's about, do we even have choices as consumers anymore?
Right.
It's about the power dynamics of, everything digital these days.
Yeah.
So we're doing a deep dive today. We're going straight to the source.
Okay.
We've got the actual complaint that the DOJ filed, and we've got some really interesting insights from this YouTuber, Matt Duran.
Yeah, I've seen his stuff.
Oh, you know him.
Yeah, he's got a good take on this.
He does. He really does. And he offers a really compelling counter-argument to what the DOJ is saying.
Okay.
So we're going to unpack both of those, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to decide for yourself.
Right.
Is Visa a ruthless company? Are they really a monopolist, or are they just a really, really good business?
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study.
Totally.
I mean, it really shows you how much we take for granted,
It's true.
Just using our cards every day.
We never even think about it. So before we get into all the drama, we need to lay some groundwork here.
Sure.
Can you kind of walk us through how a debit transaction even works, besides me and the cashier at the store?
Yeah. So imagine this. You're at the grocery store. You're about to buy that giant tub of ice cream.
Oh, of course I am.
You've got your debit card.
Yep.
And the store, they've got their point-of-sale terminal or whatever.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward.
You've
right?
said so far.
But behind the scenes, there are actually 4 main players involved.
4.
You've got the consumer, that's you with your ice cream craving.
Right.
and the merchant, which is the grocery store.
Okay, so that's two. That makes sense.
Then you've got your bank,
Uh-huh.
which in this world is called the issuer.
The issuer. Okay.
Because they issued you your debit card.
Right.
And on the other side, you've got the merchant's bank,
Okay.
which is called the acquirer.
Acquirer. Got it.
Because they're acquiring the payment from you.
So two banks involved.
Exactly. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. Those two banks,
Yeah.
they don't actually talk to each other directly.
They don't.
No, that's where payment networks like Visa come in.
Oh.
They're like the go-between,
Uh-huh.
a translator for financial languages.
So Visa's like the middleman, making sure the money gets from my account to the store's account.
More like the middleman's middleman. They verify your card details, make sure you have enough money, and then they facilitate the transfer. It all happens instantly, which is why we never think about it.
No, it's like a silent symphony of transactions or something.
Right.
We just hear the final note when the cashier says your total is.
Exactly. And that right there, that's what caught the DOJ's attention. They're arguing that Visa is using its position to, like, control the whole orchestra. And they're not happy about it.
Okay, so Visa's the conductor, the money's the music. Paint me a picture here. What's the DOJ's problem with Visa's performance?
Well, they're basically saying that Visa's turned this symphony into a solo act. They're using words like monopolization and exclusionary conduct. They're saying Visa's using its size and its power to push out any competition.
So Visa's like the diva of the debit card world?
Pretty much. Yeah, the DOJ is really focusing on these things called routing contracts. Remember how we were talking about those PN networks on the back of our debit cards?
Yeah, those pun-in pads always kind of confused me. I thought they were supposed to be competition for Visa, though.
That's the idea, right? Some transactions, like when you use your PN, those can be routed through those other networks. But here's the thing about those contracts. The DOJ is saying that Visa's using them to control everything. Darren had a really good analogy for this.
Oh, yeah, he compared it to a fast food restaurant or something.
Exactly. So imagine you're that restaurant owner. You need people to be able to pay with their debit cards.
Yeah.
Right? So you sign a contract with Visa.
Sure, you got to accept Visa if you want to stay in business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then Visa says, okay, we know you need us for all those transactions that only go through our network. But if you want a lower fee for those, you have to promise that you'll route all of your debit transactions through us, even the ones where you have a choice.
Hold on. So they're basically saying, sure, you have other options, but you're going to pay more if you use them. That doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah, the DOJ calls it a Hobson's choice. You're given a choice, but not really. And they're arguing that this makes it practically impossible for those other PI networks or other smaller competitors to get a foothold.
Because if I'm that business owner, I'm going to pick the option that saves me money, even if it means less competition.
All right, and that's where economies of scale come in. Darren talks about this too. The bigger Visa gets, the cheaper it is for them to process each transaction so they can offer lower fees to businesses. And it just makes it even harder for anyone else to compete.
So Visa's just getting bigger and bigger. It's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. And the DOJ is worried about more than just the present. They're worried about the future of payments too.
Wait, so they're saying that Visa is actually stifling innovation because they're so big?
That's their argument. They're saying that things could be way more innovative if Visa wasn't allegedly, flexing its muscles. And they have some really specific examples in the complaint, like they're saying that Visa saw Apple Pay as a huge threat.
Really? What could be so scary about Apple Pay? It's just tapping your phone.
Well, the DOJ is claiming that Visa was worried Apple Pay would cut out the traditional card networks completely.
Oh, I see, because Apple has so many users.
Exactly. They have a ton of influence. So the DOJ is saying that Visa basically used its power to make sure that Apple Pay didn't disrupt things too much.
You're saying they were paying them off or something?
Well, they're saying that there were some pretty lucrative incentives involved, and it wasn't just Apple. They're alleging that Visa used similar tactics with PayPal when they tried to move away from card-based payments.
Wow, it really makes you wonder what kind of cool new payment systems we could have if things were different.
Right. Like imagine the innovation if the playing field was more level.
Yeah, innovations that actually benefit everyone, not just the big companies.
Exactly. That's a key part of the DOJ's argument. But like any good story, there's always another side.
Right. Matt, Darren didn't exactly agree with everything the DOJ was saying, did he? So the DOJ had their say. But what about Darren's take on all this? Is Visa really the bad guy here?
Well, Darren brings up some good points. He thinks the DOJ is maybe overstating things a bit.
Okay, how so?
Well, he's not saying that Visa perfect, but he's saying they're not necessarily hurting consumers or stopping innovation.
Okay, so what's his argument?
Well, one thing is he says Visa is just doing what business is, trying to make money and stay ahead of the game?
So they're playing hardball, but it's not necessarily against the rules.
Yeah, basically. And Darren also says that Visa got to be big by actually offering something valuable. Remember how we were talking about how easy it is to use your debit card? He says Visa spent a lot of money building this network that's really reliable and secure. And he points out that, yeah, those smaller competitors might have lower fees.
Right.
But can they really say the same about fraud protection, for example, or having that global reach that Visa does?
That's a good point. I mean, I'd be a little worried about trusting some random company with my money.
Exactly. People trust Visa, and that's a big deal. Darren calls it Visa's moat.
Their moat.
Yeah, and he says they built it by being good at what they do, not just by pushing everyone else out.
It's like they earned their spot.
That's what he's saying. And he thinks the DOJ is so focused on the negatives of Visa being big that they're not really looking at the good things they do.
Interesting. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
It's complicated. And this case is really going to be important no matter what happens. It could change how Visa does business, and that could have a ripple effect on everything.
It's a lot to think about. So as we wrap up here, what are your final thoughts? What's the big takeaway for everyone listening?
I think the biggest thing is even something as simple as using your debit card. It's all connected to these bigger issues, like who has the power and what about innovation and what choices do we even have as consumers? And, Darren and the DOJ might see things differently, but they both agree we got to pay attention to how this stuff works because it affects all of us.
Absolutely. We can't just take it for granted.
Yeah.
So next time you're at the store and you pull out your card, think about all that's going on behind the scenes and think about what you want the future of payments to look like. Yeah. Maybe even use that PM pad every once in a while. Shake things up a little.
Now, that's something everyone can do. This was great. Thanks for breaking all this down for us. It's complicated.
Happy to do it. Always interesting to talk about this stuff.
Well, thanks to you and to everyone listening for joining us for this deep dive into the world of debit cards and antitrust lawsuits and everything in between. We'll be back soon with more, so stay tuned.